He was a thief in a hard hat. That's what they called him. That's what they put in the report. Marcus Teel had worked the same garbage route in Sudbury, Ontario for 11 years. 11 years of 4 a.m. alarms, of frost-cracked hands in February, of hauling other people's mess so the streets stayed clean for everyone else. He was 34 years old. He had a daughter named Brianna who liked strawberry jam on everything and a second-hand hockey table in the living room that took up more space than the couch. He didn't own much. He didn't need to. He showed up every morning. He did the work. That was enough. Or so he thought. The radio in the truck crackled that Tuesday morning the way it always did. Half static, half dispatch. The tail end of a weather warning about black ice on the north side of town. Marcus turned down the volume and steered around the curve onto Birchwood Crescent, the oldest residential street on his route. The houses here were large and quiet. Old money, mostly. The kind of neighborhood where people left their bins at the end of perfectly shoveled driveways and never once looked up to see who was doing the lifting. He pulled alongside number 34 and killed the engine for a moment. There was a woman sitting on the front steps. Not standing. Sitting, in the snow. In a housecoat and a pair of slippers that had gone completely dark with wet. She wasn't moving the way a person moves when they're waiting for something. She was just there, very still, the way a thing gets left behind. Marcus leaned over the passenger window. "Ma'am?" Nothing. He turned off the truck entirely and climbed down. The cold hit him the second his boots touched the ground, that particular February cold that gets under your collar before you've taken 2 steps. "Ma'am, are you all right out there?" She looked up. Her eyes were blue and slightly clouded, and she looked at him the way people look at something they're trying to place. Not afraid, just searching. She was old. 80, maybe. Somewhere past the age where the cold stops registering as danger. "I'm waiting for Charles," she said. "He said he'd be back by now." Marcus crouched down in front of her. Her lips were pale, her hands were in her lap, shaking with the kind of slow tremor that had nothing to do with nerves. "How long have you been sitting here?" She thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, the way someone does when the answer has gone somewhere they can't reach. "He said he'd be back," she repeated. Marcus looked at the house behind her. The front door was slightly ajar, no lights on inside. He looked back at her hands, at the thin cotton of the housecoat, at the slippers sinking slowly into the snow. He took off his work jacket and put it around her shoulders. It was the heavy one, the one with the city logo on the back that his crew lead had given him 2 winters ago when the thin one finally gave out. He didn't think about it. He just did it. "Let's get you inside," he said. "Can you stand up for me?" She let him help her. She weighed almost nothing. She smelled like lavender and cold air. He got the door open the rest of the way and walked her slowly into the front hall, which was warm and dim and full of old furniture that had the look of things that hadn't been moved in decades. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere down the hall. A china cabinet full of photographs caught the morning light from the transom window above the door. He sat her down in the chair nearest the radiator and looked around for a phone. "Do you have someone I can call for you, family?" "My nephew manages everything," she said. Her name, it turned out, was Dorothy Haynes. She told him this carefully, like she was reading it off something. "Raymond manages everything now." Marcus found a wall phone in the kitchen, an actual wall phone with a handset on a cord, and called 911. He told them what he'd found, gave them the address, described her condition. He stayed on the line until the dispatcher confirmed a paramedic unit was on the way. He stayed in the house until he heard the ambulance pull up outside. Then he went back to his truck and finished his route. He told his crew lead, Patrice, about it when they crossed paths at the depot that afternoon. Patrice wrote it in the incident log, like she always did when a driver encountered something medical on the route. Name of resident, address, time, action taken. Standard form. She clapped Marcus on the shoulder and told him he'd done the right thing and sent him home. He thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Raymond Haynes was 51 years old, and he managed, as Dorothy had said, everything. He had managed her finances since her husband passed 8 years ago. He managed the property. He managed the accounts. He had been managing things so thoroughly for so long that when Marcus Teel put his jacket around Dorothy's shoulders that Tuesday morning, Raymond was in Barrie with his girlfriend, his phone off, and his aunt nowhere in his plans for the day. Raymond arrived at the hospital that afternoon to find his aunt being treated for early-stage hypothermia and mild confusion consistent with her dementia diagnosis. He found a note in her jacket, his aunt's jacket, the one he didn't recognize, with a City of Sudbury Public Works logo on the back, with a name and an employee number written on it by the paramedics. Raymond spoke to the attending nurse. He spoke to the paramedic who'd taken the call. He spoke to 2 different hospital administrators. Then he called the police. He told them a man had entered his aunt's home without permission, had moved her, had taken, he believed, several small items from the front hallway. He hadn't confirmed this yet, but he was fairly certain, and had left a contact number in what could only be described as a suspicious manner. The officer who took the call was thorough. He followed up. He contacted Marcus's depot. Marcus was asked to come in for a voluntary interview 2 days later. He went. Because he had nothing to hide, and because when an officer calls, you go, especially when you are a black man in a mid-sized Ontario city and you understand without having to be told what the cost of not cooperating can look like. He explained exactly what happened, step by step. He gave them Patrice's name, the incident log, the 911 call record. He offered his phone to show the timeline. The officer thanked him and said they'd be in touch. Marcus went home. He made dinner. He helped Brianna with her reading homework and let her stay up 20 minutes past her bedtime because she was working on a particularly difficult picture book about a rabbit who wouldn't share, and she wanted to know how it ended. He didn't sleep much. 3 days after that, there was a knock at the door at 6:15 in the morning. 2 officers, a warrant. Charges had been formally filed, breaking and entering, theft under $5,000, and 1 additional count that Marcus's brain couldn't quite hold on to in the moment because the word theft was still bouncing off the inside of his skull. His neighbor, Mrs. Charbonneau, watched from her doorway with her arms folded and her coffee going cold in her hand. Brianna was still asleep. He left a note on the kitchen table. He wrote her name at the top and then sat for a second unable to think of what came after. Finally he wrote, "I'll explain everything, I love you. Don't be scared." He put it under the salt shaker so it wouldn't blow off. He got in the back of the police car. The drive to the station was 12 minutes. He knew because he counted the intersections. What followed was the particular kind of slow humiliation that the justice system inflicts not all at once but in layers. The processing, the waiting, the forms, the small room with the table bolted to the floor. The lawyer the court arranged for him who was tired and young and doing her very best with a caseload that was too heavy by half. Her name was Isabelle Fontaine. She had a pen that kept running out of ink and she kept shaking it back to life between sentences. "The 911 record is in your favor," she told him. "The depot log is in your favor. What we need is someone who can corroborate your account from inside the house." "There was no one else in the house," Marcus said. "That was the whole problem." Isabelle wrote something down, shook the pen, wrote something else. The arraignment was set for the following Thursday at the Sudbury courthouse on Elm Street. Marcus got there early, because being late would have been one more thing held against him. He wore the only suit he owned, the charcoal one he'd bought for his cousin's wedding 4 years ago. It was slightly too short in the sleeve now. He didn't know when that had happened. Raymond Haynes sat on the opposite side of the aisle with a pressed collar and a very clean expression. His lawyer looked expensive. His lawyer's briefcase looked expensive. Raymond looked like a man who was used to rooms making space for him. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Claire Desmarais, and she had the kind of face that gave nothing away. Not impatience, not sympathy, not irritation. She read the charges. She looked at both parties. She asked Marcus's lawyer how her client intended to plead. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Raymond's lawyer stood and began to paint a picture. An elderly woman with dementia living alone, found confused and disoriented after an unauthorized individual had entered her home. Items unaccounted for. A jacket found on her person that did not belong to her, suggesting contact that went beyond what any reasonable passerby would consider appropriate. His tone was careful and very sad, the tone of a man forced by circumstance to raise uncomfortable questions. Judge Desmarais listened. She made a note. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. There was a sound at the back of the courtroom. The doors opened. 3 women walked in. Not together, exactly. They'd come from different directions, from different cities, and they met in the doorway almost by chance, the way things sometimes line up when they are supposed to. The first was a woman in her late 30s with a paramedic uniform still half on, jacket unzipped over her scrubs, like she'd driven straight from the end of a shift. The second was a woman Marcus didn't recognize at first, not until she turned and the light caught her face. Dorothy Haynes in a wheelchair, a hospital blanket over her knees, pushed by a nurse. And the third was Patrice, his crew lead, in her depot jacket and her steel-toed boots, carrying a manila folder that she'd printed at the office that morning at 7 a.m. because she had not slept well since this whole thing started. The courtroom shifted. Raymond's lawyer paused mid-sentence. "Your Honor," said Isabel Fontaine, and Marcus had never heard someone sound so carefully composed. "The defense requests a brief recess. We have 3 witnesses who have come forward." Judge Desmarais looked at the 3 women. She looked at Raymond Haynes. She looked at the folder in Patrice's hand. 15 minutes, she said. In the hall, Marcus stood with Patrice and they didn't say much. She showed him the folder, the incident log, the depot records, a printed copy of the 911 call transcript, and a signed statement from the paramedic who'd taken Dorothy in that morning. His name was Owen, and he had written in clear, measured language exactly what he'd seen when he arrived. A woman warm and stable in a chair by the radiator, with a man's jacket around her shoulders, and a man who identified himself calmly and gave his employee number without being asked. "Owen was the one who called me," Patrice said. "He saw it on the news." Marcus nodded. "And Dorothy?" Patrice glanced toward the courtroom doors. Her GP cleared her to come. She asked to. Her exact words, according to the nurse, were Patrice looked down at her phone where she'd written it. "The young man gave me his coat. I want people to know." Marcus put his hand over his mouth for a second. He pulled it back down. "Okay," he said. When court resumed, Dorothy Haynes was brought to the front of the room in her wheelchair. The nurse positioned her carefully. Dorothy looked around the room with the slightly wondering expression of someone encountering something large and formal and slightly absurd. Her eyes found Marcus and settled there. She didn't smile exactly, but something in her face went soft and certain. Judge Desmarais leaned slightly forward. "Mrs. Haynes, I understand you've asked to make a statement." "I have," said Dorothy. Her voice was thin but clear. "The young man helped me. He sat me in my chair and he took off his coat and put it on me and he called for help. He stayed until the ambulance came." She paused. "His name is Marcus. He told me his name. I asked him because I wanted to know the name of the person who was kind to me." The room was very quiet. Raymond Haynes looked at the table in front of him. Patrice laid the folder on Isabel Fontaine's table, and Isabel laid it open in front of the judge. The 911 transcript, the timestamp, the depot incident log, Owen's statement, everything in order, everything consistent, everything matching what Marcus had said from the first minute of the first interview. Judge Desmarais looked at Raymond's lawyer, counsel. Raymond's lawyer said something very brief about the possibility that certain initial concerns had been, on reflection, perhaps not fully substantiated. Judge Desmarais looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at his hands. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Teel," she said, "you responded to an emergency, you contacted the appropriate services, you filed a report through your employer, and you cooperated with law enforcement voluntarily and immediately. The charges before this court are not supported by the evidence." She paused. "They are dismissed." She said it simply, without drama, the way you state a fact that has always been a fact and just needed the room to catch up. The charges were dismissed. Marcus sat very still for a moment. Isabel touched his arm. He nodded once and then he stood up because there was nothing else to do and because sitting still had stopped feeling like an option. In the hallway afterward, Patrice handed him the folder. He didn't know why. He took it anyway. Dorothy was being wheeled toward the elevator, and he walked over and crouched down, so they were at the same height. She looked at him for a second with those searching blue eyes. "Thank you for the coat," she said. "It's yours if you want it," he said. She shook her head. "Give it to the next person who needs it." He drove home in his own truck. Patrice had driven it over, left the keys in the ignition, which was either an enormous act of trust or a mild traffic violation, probably both. He parked in front of his house. He sat for a minute. Then he went inside. Brianna was at school. The note was still on the kitchen table under the salt shaker. He picked it up and folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket, the court jacket, the charcoal one that was too short in the sleeve. He didn't throw it away. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because don't be scared was the kind of thing worth keeping, even after the fear was done. That evening he picked Brianna up from his sister's house where she'd been staying, and she ran at him the way she always did, full speed, like she'd been saving it up. He caught her and held on for a second longer than usual. She didn't complain about it, which meant she already knew something had happened, the way children know things without being told. He made pasta for dinner. He let her put jam on the garlic bread, which he normally drew the line at, and she looked at him sideways with that look she had, the one that meant she was deciding whether to push it or let it go, and she let it go. He told her a version of it, simplified, not dishonest. He told her he'd helped an old woman who was cold and scared and alone. He told her some people thought that was wrong, but it wasn't, and the people who decide those things had figured that out. He told her sometimes doing the right thing gets complicated before it gets resolved. She thought about this while she chewed her bread with the jam on it. But she was okay, Brianna asked, the old lady. She was okay. Because of you. Because somebody stopped, Marcus said. That's all. Somebody just stopped. Brianna wiped her mouth with the back of her hand the way she always did despite his best efforts, and looked at him very seriously. I would have stopped, she said. I know you would have, he said. That's the whole point. Raymond Haynes did not face criminal charges. He did face, several weeks later, a civil review initiated by a legal advocacy group in Toronto that had heard about the case through a local news story that ran 2 days after the dismissal. The review concerned the management of Dorothy's estate and the question of whether her care needs had been adequately met in the months prior to that February morning. Marcus didn't follow it closely. He had a route to run. What he did do, about a week after everything was over, was go back to Birchwood Crescent. He had Dorothy's jacket, her housecoat actually, which the hospital had returned in a bag along with her slippers, and he'd had it cleaned and folded, and he brought it to the front door of number 34, where a care worker named Sylvie now came twice a day. He knocked. Sylvie answered. Dorothy was in the sitting room, in the chair by the radiator where he'd put her that February morning. She looked up when he came in. You came back, she said. I was in the neighborhood, he said. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him that first morning, searching, placing, settling, and then something landed and her face cleared. Marcus, she said. That's right, he said. He sat with her for 20 minutes. She told him about her husband, who had been an electrician. She told him about the house, which had been in her family for 40 years. She told him she hadn't been outside in the snow in a very long time, and she missed it, the quiet of it, the way it made everything soft. When he left, Sylvie walked him to the door. She doesn't remember most people, Sylvie said quietly. I just want you to know, she remembered you. Marcus nodded. He walked back to his truck. He had a route to run. He ran it. There are people in every city who move through it before most of us are awake, the ones who lift and carry and drive and clean, the ones the infrastructure depends on and the culture ignores. They are not background. They are not scenery. They are the reason the street looks the way it does when you walk out your door in the morning. Pay attention to them. And if you know one, if there's a Marcus on your route, someone who showed up and did the right thing in a moment when nobody was watching, drop their name somewhere people can see it. They have earned that much, at least. I keep thinking about the coat. Not the courtroom, not the charges, not Raymond's expensive briefcase or the way the judge's face gave nothing away. I keep thinking about Marcus taking off his jacket in the cold and putting it on a woman he had never met, without stopping to calculate what it might cost him. That's the moment everything else grew out of, that one quiet decision, made before sunrise on a street where nobody was watching. What strikes me about Marcus isn't that he was brave. It's that he was decent in a moment that didn't ask him to be anything at all. He could have called it in from the truck. He could have driven past and told himself it wasn't his problem. Nobody would have known. But he got out. He crouched down in the snow and he asked if she was all right. And then he stayed until help came. That's not heroism. That's just a person choosing to be good when it would have been easier not to. And that choice set something in motion. I think about how we tend to assume that doing the right thing protects you. That goodness is a kind of armor. Marcus's story says otherwise. He did everything right and still ended up in handcuffs at 6 in the morning while his daughter slept down the hall. The world doesn't always reward decency immediately. Sometimes it punishes it first, just to see if you mean it. What held Marcus together through all of it wasn't luck. It was something quieter, the kind of clear-headedness that comes from knowing exactly what you did and why. He didn't panic. He gave his name, his employee number, the timeline, the incident log. He answered every question calmly because he understood that the truth was the only thing he had, and he knew where it was. That kind of steadiness under pressure isn't something you find in a crisis. It's something you build slowly, by being honest in ordinary moments until honesty becomes the only way you know how to operate. And then there was Patrice. Owen, Dorothy herself, asking to be wheeled into that courtroom so she could say, in front of everyone, that the young man had given her his coat. People who had no obligation to show up. People who showed up anyway. That's the part of the story I can't stop thinking about, that Marcus's one good act created a kind of gravity, and the right people felt it and moved toward it. I think we underestimate what it takes to be that kind of person. To be Dorothy, who remembered the name of someone who was kind to her. To be Patrice, who printed those records at 7 in the morning because she hadn't slept right since it started. To hold on to what you know is true and carry it forward, even when the room isn't on your side yet. That's what I want to take from this. Not a lesson about the system or about race or about who gets believed and who doesn't, though all of that is real and worth sitting with. What I want to take is simpler than that. Get out of the truck, put the coat on her, stay until help comes, and trust that the things you do in the dark when nobody is watching are still real. They count. They leave a mark on the world whether or not anyone sees them in the moment. Marcus went back to his route the next morning. He had a job to do. He did it. That's the whole story, and somehow that's also the point.